works around prints. I'm going to be talking about a few other things. My name is Anne Ryan, and I'm the Curator of Australian prints, drawings and watercolours at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. And I'm joined today by three people who are also involved in collecting prints. We have an artist, we have a collector, and we have a regional museum person, and I'll get everybody to introduce themselves when they speak. But the way that we're going to do it is each of us is going to present a little bit about our own collecting practice and the things that we collect, and then we'll open up the floor to questions at the end. So we might start with my slides, if that's okay. The Art Gallery of New South Wales collection, full stop, started with the acquisition of a watercolour back in 1874 by Conrad Martins, and ever since then we've been collecting works on paper in all our collecting areas, in Australian art, in international art, and which covers Western art and also Asian art. And it's a very active area of collecting for us, not only in a historical sense but also in a contemporary sense. We collect works of art retrospectively, so we look at things from the past, but we also buy work that's being made by artists at the moment. We collect work by artists that make work for us, but also stuff that they're doing as part of their general practice and that's available for everybody to buy. We'll start with some images. They're coming. So what I thought I would do was just talk about some works that we've been collecting over the last 2 or 3 years. And it's divided into areas of historical and geographic interest, and then it'll give you an idea of some works which are actually currently on display. This is a work which was bought in 2013, Albrecht Dürer's most famous and enigmatic engraving, Melancholia from 1514. A very exciting acquisition for the gallery because it's one of the very few works that scholars and art historians still are disagreeing about what it's about. No one can really work out what all the iconography in it is about. The gallery has recently bought the entire Marriage à la Mode suite of intaglio prints by William Hogarth. Printmaking, of course, was a way of, in this period, was a way of popularising painting. So that Hogarth did a series of paintings of morality tales about of culture, and then they were published as prints for wider dissemination. This is Henri Matisse's Jazz, an amazing artist book which was purchased last year, and it's currently on show at the moment at the gallery. These are pochoir prints, which are sort of prints that are made using ink applied in this way as through a stencil. One of the most important 20th century prints made in the Western tradition. We've also got the portfolio complete from the Guerrilla Girls, purchased last year, again on show at the moment in another exhibition, See You at the Barricades, which is about protest in art. The Guerrilla Girls are a group of women in New York. They are anonymous, and they're very engaged politically in issues about the art world, about representation of women in art and representation of women artists in the art market. This is a show that's coming up next year, Yoshitoshi's 100 Aspects of the Moon. It's 103 colour woodblock prints looking at the moon as a theme, and that's going to be on show in September 2016. These are major acquisitions that we've managed to buy, which are actually forming part of an exhibition program, but of course we also keep these works in perpetuity. This is a work that will be bought earlier this year by Julian Ashton of Mossman's Bay, one of the artist camps of the 19th century associated with the Impressionist artists of Sydney around the harbour. We've lost our images again. So I collect Australian art on paper, so anything on paper apart from photography. This is another work by a selection of etchings by Mortimer Mempps. He was an Australian artist who made his career in Europe, and he was a very good friend of Whistler, who was an important etcher. And we bought these works this year, building up our collections of artists who are Australian but made their career in other places. Jessie Trail, probably more important as an etcher than anybody than in any other medium, and she was an Australian artist. This was from a series of works she made while she was in England in the 1930s, just before the Second World War. With some artists, they are best on paper or as etchers in printmaking, and so it's important that a museum like ours collects their work. Ditto Martin Lewis, an artist who was born in Australia but made his career in America, and I've just purchased this from New York. It's very exciting. He made these works in New York and became very, very famous, and he's highly sought after in America. But of course, he started off in Castlemaine and spent a year in Sydney in 1900. And again, he's one of these artists who's more important as a printmaker than in any other area, and it's something that we like to collect and to express in our public collections, but not necessarily on the walls. This is Frank Weitzel, who was an artist born in Germany and studied in America, but came to England in the came to Australia in the late 20s, early 30s, part of a group of artists who were looking at modernism in Australian art. David Strawn, this was bought in 2012. David Strawn was better known as a painter, but also a really important, made a series of really important artist books, and he made these in France. And this is a beautiful aquatint and etching of two women in an interior, very much of that school of Paris period where artists were looking at romantic sort of images. Janet Dawson was an important person in the revival of printmaking in Australia, and AKKY might speak to her in terms of the Print Council of Australia. These were also made in Paris at a time in the early 60s where printmaking was really exploding internationally and became very highly regarded and back in the imaginations of museums and collectors. Peter Upward, an Australian painter whose work was very expressive, very painterly, also made these fantastic lithographs in the early 60s, which we've just acquired for the collection. The early 1960s was a period where a lot of artists in Australia were following international trends and producing prints. Prints being a way of producing work that was more accessible in terms of price, more accessible in terms of expanding out into the market, because of course they're multiples, but also being more highly valued by collectors as well. And that's something that has continued with its ups and downs until the present. Lost our images again. But as you can see, we're very actively buying prints, and I suppose that's the point I'm trying to make with this talk today, is that museums like ours, where we have a long-standing collection of works of art on paper, are continuing to build, and this is a very valid area for people to collect. Martin Sharp, this is a work from the late 1960s from his pop period. These were works that were printed onto plastic and designed, if you think of those works that you see, posters that you see on bus stops with the light behind them, like a light box. David Mcdermid, one of these artists who had a more political practice. This is a work from the 1970s looking at counterculture and gay sexuality and the art that was being produced on this mass scale about issues that were more, less high art if you like, and more about political issues and issues of the day, personal politics and public politics. Again, we've lost our images. And as you can see, I've also done this in a sort of timeline. So you can see that we're collecting works from the 19th century and earlier, if we go back to Dürer, but also coming up into the present. One of the interesting things that I find as a curator, that a lot of artists may not have exhibited their prints and their drawings as much as they did their paintings, or perhaps the records for that don't survive as much as they did for the paintings. But this work did exist, it did be made, and it was the kind of stuff that was perhaps remained in their artist studios and emerges later on. The thing about prints and drawings, of course, is that they're fundamental to an artist's oeuvre and their artist's practice, but often they tend to fly under the radar in terms of commercial exhibitions. The great thing about this fair is that there has been a concerted effort to focus on works of art on paper as well as other types of art. And as collectors, it's something worth considering because it often is a really good gateway, if you like, into collecting, I find. I don't know what's happened to my images, so perhaps we'll just open up the conversation. But AKKY, I was talking about the 1960s, and you're going to be talking about the Print Council of Australia, which happened at around the same time. Can you talk about printmaking in Australia from that period and how it's pushed through to the present, and it's still very much alive and kicking?
They are certainly alive and kicking. The Print Council started actually in 1966. And I think it was actually really to become much more a push, to push the prints and the printmaking. And I'm actually talking about it after you have first talked about the Manly Art Gallery collection. But yes, the 60s, not only in Australia, but the 60s internationally, that was just an enormous explosion.
And the Print Council is a sort of is a body of people with a shared interest and a shared passion for making prints that kind of sustain this practice into the present. We'll just keep looking at these slides behind us. These are just some more acquisitions that have been made. This is a work that was gifted to us recently, but made in the mid-1990s. Again, it's in the See You at the Barricades exhibition, which is about protest and dissent in art. And it's reproductions of a newspaper. Gosia Vrodacek, she's an artist who makes drawings, also prints, but an artist who makes drawings as part of a performance. She was in an exhibition at the gallery last year where she did a large drawing on a glass wall, and this work was given to us by a collector, which is a paperwork that you can actually hang on the wall and keep, more collectible than a performance drawing. With the print, here we go. We've got another print here by Sid Ball. I'm going to switch here. One of the ways that we do collect art at the gallery is not just through purchase, but through cultural gifts and gifts from artists and collectors, and that's something that's very important to us. We have no government funding to buy works for the collection. So you'll see with some of these works, you'll see the phrase donated through the Australian Government's Cultural Gift Program, this work here by Graham Kua also. A very important way for institutions like ours, and perhaps like yours, Catherine, at Manly, to collect works of art in a way that is of benefit to the donor, but also to the institution. These are works that were made in the mid-2000s and screen prints. This is Elizabeth Cummings. Elizabeth Cummings is probably best known to many people as a painter, but she's also a fantastic printmaker, really, really fantastic printmaker. Her paintings sell before her shows even open, but prints, because they're multiples, they are a way that you can collect her work and buy her work. And they're very much works in their own right. They're not reproductions of the painting she's made, but actual works, as I say, in their own right. Lost our images again. Here we go. Ewan McLeod, another painter. And as you can see, some of these artists we've bought in multiples. With works of art on paper, you can actually, especially prints, you can actually borrow, you can own or collect groups of works by one artist. It's more affordable to do it. You can actually delve into their work in a bit of a deeper way. Some artists work in series, and other artists work in a way that's they make large bodies of work, and that's the nice thing about prints and drawings. You can collect more than one thing. Marco Fusinato, there's an exhibition of his work on here at the fair at the moment at Anna Schwartz Gallery, just a couple of buildings down. Again, this is on display at the gallery in that exhibition about protest and art, a very large painting-sized screen print. This is a drawing by John Wardley, a multiple panel drawing that he gave us last year after an exhibition we did of his work, which involved drawings. Drawings and prints as I said before, are often works that remain a little bit under the radar, but they're often quite foundational in an artist's practice, and so they give an insight into their work that you cannot get from paintings and other more finely finished things. These are small drawings by Tom Carment, which we bought last year, tiny little works of plein air watercolours of the environs of Sydney, different places around, from the beach and the coast right through to the city, the inner west and further afield. Emily Floyd's series of colour lithographs, which were produced by the Australian Print Workshop. They've got a stall here at the fair at the moment, and I think one of them is actually for sale. Very interesting artist whose work is about collectives and collaboration, and of course printmaking often being a collaborative kind of process where the artist is working with master printers and printmakers to make their work, is a beautiful thing coming together, if you like, in that work. This is a large drawing on board that we bought this year by Ross Laurie. He's an artist who lives up on the Northern Tablelands, and it's a work about the landscape and where he lives on a farm. We might just let them run behind us, but Catherine, perhaps, Catherine is at the Manly Art Gallery and Museum. Perhaps you'd like to talk about your role in collecting prints and works of art for your slightly public museum, but also a smaller regional museum.
And maybe I could run through my presentation as well. Yes, so we're a public regional gallery, Manly Art Gallery and Museum, funded by Manly Council largely and partially by Arts New South Wales through an annual grant. We do have an acquisitions budget, but that has to accommodate our 5 collection areas, chiefly ceramics, art, visual art, and that is paintings and printmaking, museum objects, because we're a museum and an art gallery, and what did I say? Ceramics, works on paper. Paintings as part of that. So of the 1,400 works we have in the visual arts collection, probably 200 are prints specifically, and then we have drawings on top of that. What we've found over time, I think is, I was telling Ron earlier that in the late 70s, early 80s, a lot of the regional galleries, of which there are 40 at the moment in New South Wales, and that number is continuing to grow slowly, but when you think that maybe 20 years ago there were only a couple, it's a real testament to the communities getting behind visual arts practice in their regions and providing visual arts for their communities. So I think the collection, say with the prints, has been very much reflects the taste and style of the director at the time. So Clarence Thomas, who is the daughter of Young, who set up Macquarie Galleries, she was the first voluntary director of Manly Art Gallery and Museum and eventually became a paid director in the late 70s. And you'll see with my slides that she collects of that period, and the works that she likes approved by the committee and very much major printmakers at the time. And then we have in the audience Therese Kenyon, who started as director at Manly Art Gallery and Museum in 98 or 99, 99 or 98, and was director for 12 years. And Therese, with her background as an artist, as a printmaker, with that extensive knowledge of the printmaking scene, our printmaking collection just, really benefited from that, with that focus. I don't claim to be a printmaking expert. Perhaps my knowledge has really been developed in artists of the region, and they include many printmakers and ceramics. We were recently bequeathed $20,000 specifically, and Anne and I were talking about this earlier, that was for the acquisition of ceramics. So I went shopping, and the ceramics collection benefited from that. And we as a small regional gallery with 3.5 full-time staff, and me who's managing the collection plus managing a lot of the exhibitions, it's hard to become a specialist working in a regional gallery in a particular medium. So we really rely, and I was thinking about future directions for Manly's collection. It's probably time we brought in a printmaking works on paper expert to assess it, as we've done with the ceramics collection. We brought in Gillian McCracken in 2005 to look at where we needed to plug the gaps. In 2008, we brought in Lindy Ward, a curator at Powerhouse Museum, to advise on where our incredible swimwear collection should go and what we needed to collect to add to that, kind of national repository of Australian beach culture. And so now I think it's time, and AKKY is actually on our board, the Manly Art and Culture Committee. So to have someone of AKKY's calibre, I think it'd be great to get some future advice about where to take the collection. With the $10,000 we get from Manly Council, and then this Theo Batten, who lived in Manly, didn't have a family, and bequeathed his estate to Manly, and with that Manly Council invests the money, depending on the stock market, we might get between $20,000 and $45,000 a year. So that, added to the 10,000, can be quite substantial. I mean, when you think of Newcastle Art Gallery, they might have 70,000 as the council contribution, plus other bequests and things. It's a little different, but particularly works on paper, we can do well. But we also find that exhibitions that we're planning, I think you alluded to this, presents a really good opportunity to focus on a theme or a collection area. So next year we have a largely works on paper exhibition called Go Figure, and it's going to look at the figurative works in the collection, and we might take the opportunity to purchase a print to go into that exhibition. Or later in the year we've got Mambo returning to Manly, and there's Reg Mombassa and a number of them obviously are graphic artists, printmakers, painters, and that might present as a good collecting opportunity. And we also have Ben Rack. So he's a local artist. He approached us in a couple of years ago and flew the flag and said, hey, I'm a printmaker, I've just moved into DY, just wondering if you'd be interested in my work, and of course we were immediately. So I curated him into an exhibition as the printmaker coming up opening on December the 4th, called Out of Quarantine Museum Show, because it's working with the Quarantine Station collection. So he is as the printmaker. We've also got a ceramicist and a painter and an installation artist. So he is creating new work in response to the Q Station migration, the site and its history, and bringing his pre-existing ideas about real estate and about, he's looking at the flags in the collection and colour, and how a beachside suburb like Manly can have this quarantine migration history and what's happening with migration and the debate at the moment. So very interesting work, and who knows, we might end up collecting one or two of the prints that end up in the exhibition, and that certainly happened. We have a wonderful Indigenous print collection, and that resulted in Therese receiving a grant from the Gordon Darling Foundation and went with Helen Reid out into Central Australia, Northern Territory, and collected a number of prints for the collection. So maybe I'll just run through and give you a bit of an idea if this is going to work for me. Is there someone over there? Yeah. Oh, working on it. Okay. All right.
Oh, well, look, Catherine, I might just, I suppose one of the questions that it brings up is that collections are always going to be shaped by personalities.
Yes.
So the people you were talking about, Clarence Thomas and Therese Kenyon, both had an interest in art, but a particular interest, larger or smaller, in printmaking. Printmaking, of course, as I spoke about before, is a more affordable way of collecting art, but it's also something that reflects passions for different people. How has the Manly collection of printmaking and prints been formed around those early personalities, if you like, those nuclei that were created by those people? Have they been built upon over the subsequent years?
Yes. Well, you might be familiar with the work of Salvatore Zafrea, who lives in Seaforth. His work is, internationally collected, and he happens to live on the northern beaches. His series, Anne has written an essay for this book, but Days of Summer, which was produced in 2007-8, he is in the process of donating a set of 40 prints to Manly Art Gallery Museum through the Cultural Gifts program, through the federal government program. Another series and portfolio looking at the harbour, Manly being in a unique position in Sydney, but regional, on the harbour, on the coast, gives us the freedom to collect in a number of those areas related to water. So we collected or purchased through the Theo Batten bequest the Seaport of Desire series that Olsen produced. I think it was 7-8 prints in that portfolio, which was really fantastic and has been used and borrowed most recently by the S.H. Irvine Gallery as a complete set framed by yours truly, and off it went to the S.H. Irvine Gallery, and we have put it in to numerous exhibitions because of its adaptability. You may or may not be aware that Manly is now 85 years old. We produced this book in 2010 to mark its 80th anniversary, and focused on 80 stories with their interesting provenance, and some of that is teased out, who collected the work, how was it collected, how did they come into the collection, all very important for public institutions like us to be aware of and to keep records of. And in it, I hadn't looked at it for a little while, but there's a beautiful set of 4 tales or stories about print works, and one that I hadn't put in the PowerPoint presentation, which you may or may not see, is this Brett Whiteley.
Giant Bottom.
Giant Bottom,
by Brett Whiteley.
Woman Under a Shower. And that was donated to us through the Cultural Gifts program in 1999. And I was reminded of it because we're putting on an exhibition at Christmas called Destination Sydney. And we'll have Brett Whiteley, Lloyd Rees, Elizabeth Cummings. And I thought, I've got to sneak that in somehow. It's got nothing to do with Sydney or Sydney Harbour, but anyway.
It has the spirit of it.
Yeah,
but
maybe
all of those 3 artists, of course, are prolific printmakers.
Absolutely.
And that's something that's that people perhaps don't remember about these very well-known painters, is that they actually are important printmakers.
And you showed a work of Elizabeth Cummings in your collection, and because we're working with her on Destination Sydney, she has just donated through the Cultural Gifts program 4 prints of the Flinders Ranges, which is really terrific for us to have.
Akky, I'll get to you now. I don't know whether your slides are going to work. I suspect not. But tell the audience a little bit about the Print Council of Australia. Established in the mid-60s at a time where everyone's getting excited about printmaking again, but also perhaps feeling that there needed to be a place for an advocacy body to explain to the collecting public about what prints actually are and why they're important as art and why they're important to collect and to make. Perhaps you can tell us about that, and because next year, of course, is a very important year for the Print Council in being your, which anniversary? Your
50th
birthday.
Yeah, 50th anniversary. So yes, the Print Council is a not-for-profit organization, and it was actually established in 1966 through the efforts of Dr. Ursula Hoff, and she was the keeper of the prints at the
National Gallery
of Victoria. And then there were two artists, Udo Selbach and Graham King. And I think when you really read the history, which I will absolutely not going into at the moment, because we are talking about collections and archives, but I think it started like a sort of a man shed, I think. And there was nowhere where they could actually make the prints, and that's why they got together in 1966. In 1967, they produced the first sort of 5 prints, which started the collection of the Print Council of Australia, and
that collection is now in the State Library of Victoria?
Yes, so the good thing of this actually is that that's what I want to talk about, because it became a print commission. And it is to support the printmakers who have the chance to actually submit a print, digital, not a digital print, but a digital way of sending it in. Every year we are selecting 10 prints. We've got about over 600 in our archives at the moment. This year we had 10 beautiful prints made by 10 beautiful artists, which should be dancing on this screen at the moment.
But which you can see if you visit the Print Council of Australia's stall.
Yeah, you can go to the MO9 imprint stall. The print commission was purchased by the Victorian State Library in 2011. It was actually really a burden, nearly a burden on the Print Council's shoulders, because we were unable to really show it regularly. The accessibility was always problematic.
How many works, so from 1966 you encouraged and made real, if you like, the creation of a number of works every year, which your members had the option to buy, but you also retained this collection, which is in the State Library. How many works from that period right through to today has the Print Council been responsible for, if you like, in creating?
If we are talking up to now, which is 50 years, and there was a sort of some years we had 10 artists submitting or being selected, some 12, some 15. We had some presidential prints. So I think that in that collection is nearly 600 prints. And it is typical, the history of printmaking in Australia from the 60s up to now. So it is a very important archive. And I must say that not only it is in the State Library, but we still have an archive as well. And it continues. I mean, it's not stopping. So maybe in 100 years, when we are celebrating our 100th anniversary, then we have got about 1,200 prints. But anyway, it is also a very important thing, which I want to underline, that it is to really make it possible for printmakers to be selected and then be in this incredible collection, but also being collected by institutions.
To have their work disseminated.
To really have it in a much wider context. Schools, universities, regional galleries.
And private collectors.
And private collectors. So
Ron, you're a printmaker and an artist. You're also a collector. How long has it been since you've been serious about making prints in your work? Has it been from the very beginning when you were at art school, right through to now?
Yeah, I started making prints in about 75, I guess.
And you work not just with yourself making your own work, but you work with other artists as well.
Yeah.
Can you tell our audience a little bit about that?
about making work with other artists. Or
And also your own practice. What's involved in being a printmaker in Australia today? What kind of things do you do in your practice?
I think a lot of artists like myself work, it's like a jack of all trades, so you do what you can to sort of survive in a way, and I think most people are like that these days. So I would work with other artists, like the Ewan McLeods were quite familiar because they were ones I printed with Ewan. And then I might have other artists up to my studio and make prints with them and make my own work in the studio, and then I might do workshops somewhere else and teach at university sometime. And so you do a number of different things to survive. But I could talk about collecting if it stays up.
Let's see if the slides work for you.
I started collecting because I was showing stuff to students, showing images to students, and they couldn't really see the images really well. You know, they're all grainy and horrible and stuff like that. And so I started to buy prints so that I could show the students what the prints really looked like. And so I sort of relate what I collect to a sort of what they call like a Kunstkammer, which is an art cabinet, or a wonder cabinet, Wunderkammer. And the prints that I collect give me an understanding of what the world's like. So people originally collected artifacts and prints and things like that, and I collect prints so that I can understand things. And then I showed those prints to my students. And I couldn't collect everything, so I decided to collect things that I really loved. And I started to collect British prints. And that became the focus of my collection. And my work at the time was influenced by a particular printmaker called Samuel Palmer. And Samuel Palmer was a British printmaker. And he loved the work of William Blake. And William Blake is a wonderful visionary printmaker. And that was where my collection started, and then it sort of grew from there. I mean, I needed an excuse. Every collector needs an excuse. And so I tell my wife that I was buying them to show to the students.
That wasn't true though, really,
and the second reason was I was buying them because I could maybe have an exhibition of them and one day sell them and make a profit, but I mean, I wasn't ever going to sell anything. So you need excuses, and then the collection sort of grew from there. And it sort of, but it stayed within its area. I think good collections need to stay within their area. We were talking about different regional galleries in Australia collect different areas, so they don't all stand on each other's toes. So one might collect glass, and another one might collect fibre, and so on and so forth. These are just images of like Wunderkammers and these crazy collections that you see in images, which I absolutely love. So how does that relate? So that's I guess another string to my bow. And the advantage for me as an artist of having this collection is I can actually use it in my work, and I can reference it, and I can learn from it, and I can somehow add to it. I don't know if I can add to Samuel Palmer, but I can sort of gain something from it and reinterpret some of these people that I love in my own particular way, really. Here's the first image I ever bought for my collection. I kept advising other people on what to buy, but I never bought myself, and I thought, I've got to start buying. So that was the Herdsman's Cottage, my very first Palmer, and I've gone on to buy a number of different Palmers. And I still get a lot of joy out of buying things. And when I get something great, like a fantastic big Brangwyn or a fantastic Gerald Brockhurst, it sends a chill down your spine when you find something that's really nice. But I don't have a lot of money, and I never have for collecting, so It's just, you just sort of chip away at it and do your research, and eventually you'll come across a gem that you can afford. Because there's a lot of really affordable art out there that doesn't cost $50,000, I can assure you.
The thing that you were saying about your students didn't know what things look like, this is something that anybody who's collected art learns and begins to understand, is the actual object itself.
The physicality of it.
The physical object is so far removed from an image you might see in a book or on a screen. Do you return to your collection when you're interested, when you're trying to push through something in your own work, or is it more a vicarious, pleasurable experience?
Oh, no, like I'll sort of look through the work and I'll think, oh, well, there's a particular Rubens landscape I'm looking at the moment. It's a rain landscape that Rubens did, small landscapes which are big on our terms, and I'll use that in a work. I'm not sure how, but it's one I've never used before, but I've just started to be drawn toward this particular Rubens work. But it might happen with someone else totally different another time.
The physical nature of a print, and I think we'd all agree with this, when you actually look at a print and how it's made, it's not a flat thing. It's not just about the image, but it's also about the object itself and how it's made and the ink that's been used and the surface of it and all that kind of thing. Is that something that you felt was absolutely vital for your students to understand? Were they not being able to access art?
I think with something like etching or engraving or maybe not so much litho because it's quite flat, but you get sucked into some of the sort of quality of the surface of some of these beautiful prints, that sort of that sculptural quality of them.
So even though they are multiples and therefore more accessible, more easily collectible, cheaper, they still are unique objects of art in their own right, and ultimately something that's of value that goes beyond a reproduction or a poster, that kind of thing.
Sure.
Speaking as a practitioner and a maker of prints, why is it that you make prints as opposed to something else?
I sort of can. I found that I can, and I found I can do it okay. And other things I couldn't do as well. That's why I don't make tables. But I can do it okay. And I seem to know what I'm doing, even though I don't think I know what I'm doing when I start a print, but I think I know what I'm doing.
Does it express what you're trying to say more effectively?
If it's a good print, if it's successful, it does. But hopefully it does. It's something, I sort of know it. Yeah. It's hard to explain.
But the medium also gives its own identity. I mean, you will never be able to express your thoughts or whoever's thoughts when you go on the painting, because it's much more distance. But this is really
you approach it differently.
You approach it completely differently.
It's smaller, it's more intimate. You can see it up here rather than over there.
But it can be big as well.
That's true, absolutely.
See, like the Brangwyn, well, you've got the one on the left there.
You've got that one on the left.
So those two are in my collection, and they're just absolute knockout things. And he was in 1906 when he did the one on the left. He was doing plates that big, which is quite extraordinary for a sort of real expressionist work before the expressionists were doing it. I mean, for me, he's one of the most underrated printmakers in the world. This guy, fantastic.
And they're still relatively affordable.
And so that the one on the left is a Gout, and the one on the right is my referencing that particular work on the left. Yeah.
I think I saw that. Do you have that down here at the moment?
No.
No. Okay.
That's on my card.
The other thing that I spoke about before about collecting an artist in depth, for a museum or a private collector, you can start looking at somebody and not just having one thing by them, but perhaps having several. Also leads into the idea of seriality and being able to do bodies of work that can stay together rather than being dissipated into the four corners of the world. And you've done works in series, including works based on Hogarthian themes, looking at morality and all that kind of thing. Is that something that you feel you can only really do in printmaking? Or is the printmaking just more amenable to that?
I'm sure you can do it in other mediums, but I tend to just do it in printmaking myself. and enjoy it, and I'll sort of keep coming back to certain themes after, I'll sort of get a theme that I like and I'll do a series, and then I might do some more on that series 10 years later.
But also, as we see here, building upon a very long-standing tradition in art. AKKY, with the Print Council of Australia, as an advocacy body for artists and an advocacy body for a medium, it's quite unique in many ways, in Australia certainly. Do you feel that the Print Council's role has changed, or it has an important continuing function for printmaking, and why is that necessary in terms of encouraging people to collect and to amass collections of prints?
I definitely think that very slowly the Print Council advocacy is changing because of there is different time, there is also a different way of making prints. I think it's not only the fact that we are giving the artists the chance to produce their work, but I also think that we are very much involved in what Imprint is doing to
this is your magazine,
this
Imprint.
is the magazine, to really actually talk about the printmaking and the medium and the people who are doing it, etc., etc. And also, especially the methods, with digital and
the expanding field.
The expanding field.
Yeah.
But also about the fact, for example, that nowadays there are so many possibilities to make prints in an abundance and have unlimited editions. And also that, for example, the language is changing as well. These are all things which are changing, and the Print Council, we are saying, okay, it's now 50 years, but we have to go with the times, and who knows, in 10 years' time, this is not existing anymore like this, but it is all online and whatever.
But artists are still going to be producing prints.
Absolutely, that's what I mean, so that is still a very concrete thing. And no, I think that the Print Council still has an enormous role to play. I have to say this anyway, but it is true. And since we are not having this is the 2015 works which have been produced, and it's 10 works of a variety of artists from all over Australia, and that's also, of course, important. It's from all states, and this year's judges were from New South Wales. Anne Ryan was one of them, and Jude McBean from Grafton Regional Gallery. But we also changed the selectors, the judges, from state to state. So we try to really have that whole Australian idea and encompass that. That's not a good
And
word.
letting people around the country know what's being made elsewhere, which is something you can do with printmaking that perhaps is a little harder to do with painting. If it's happening in Adelaide or Queensland, it might be harder for people here to.
And coming back to that idea of what you just said, that the explosion in the 60s, we were talking about it a couple of days ago, about it. I feel, and some others feel, that there is another explosion. Is that, in the last 5 years. I mean, there is really such an interest in printmaking, in all its abundance of media, in not only the big cities, but in the regions, and print studios are sort of coming up. Victoria is actually a very good example where all those print studios are. And then I must say that printmakers are the most wonderful people. They talk to each other, and there's collaboration, and I think that is also a very important part. So
and of course you can see some of these people in the fair at the moment. Look, I think we're getting on for time, so we might open up the floor to any questions if there are any. Sorry about the slide situation. We weren't as visual as perhaps we wanted to be in the talk today.
Otherwise we would have done a song and dance, isn't it?
But if anyone's got any questions, please put your hand up, and otherwise we might, yes?
How would it reflect on an artist's career if they don't want to do prints of their work?
It would be perfectly fine. I mean, artists make what they make. But the interesting thing from the perspective of printmaking is that it's often a slightly less known or hidden aspect of their practice. And some artists, such as the ones we've been talking about today, might be very well known for paintings, but not so much for their prints. But many artists don't make prints, and that's perfectly fine as well. There has to be a visual reason for them to make prints. If there's no reason for them to make prints in part in terms of their practice, well, it seems silly to do so. But for some artists, conceptually, prints are the only way they can express what they're trying to say. Yeah. So I don't think it's something you should do as a sort of as a box to tick, but more if it fits in with what you're trying to say, by all means do it.
I was wondering, Catherine, are there any studio spaces in the Manly area or the Pittwater area for young up-and-coming artists, shared space for collaboration that's subsidised by council?
Well, Manly Council doesn't have a studio space. We're not quite like, say, Hazelhurst, which is purpose-built, and Tweed, which has its own artist studio. We do partner with the Rambu Artist Environment up in Terry Hills, which is a not-for-profit arts organisation on Crown land. And Pittwater Council sponsors residencies up there. There's North Head, there's a wonderful opportunity, you know, on our doorstep at North Head, the Sydney Harbour Federation Trust, which did a wonderful job creating an artist studio space at Middlehead, you know, in Mossman. So I know Mossman Art Gallery often partners, perhaps not so much paying for an artist in residence at one of the spaces, but working with them on open days and during the Mossman Festival, etc. So, I mean, we've got the Manly Arts Festival opening next Friday night, and there's a bronze foundry up at North Head. I'm working on a project in 2017 with 12 artists responding to the whole of the North Head site. Look, there are, I mean, I know Michael Muir, who's in the fair, Charfait Durs, they've got private rented studio space in Brookvale. There are a lot of artists, shared studios, adjacent studios in the Northern Beaches area, you know, collective spaces. There's the new Warringah Creative Space, which Warringah Council's funded. They've converted an old scout hall into a space, exhibition space in the middle for studios, plus an outdoor workshop where they can have sculpture and metal. Probably a bit of a flow-on from Brookvale TAFE, which unfortunately, well, fortunately for the ceramicists, still runs a very, you know, viable, fantastic ceramic studio, but the whole of fine arts is shut down. So all of those sculptors who were studying there thought, where do we go? So they've moved back into the garages or to the Warringah Creative Space. It's good that it's not just Manly Council and Manly Art Gallery Museum, even though we're the only regional gallery in the Northern Beaches and the only metropolitan-based regional gallery in Sydney, because we're closer to the MCA. You know, you get the fast ferry. We're 15 minutes to the MCA, Art Gallery of New South Wales, and very close, very metropolitan. But I suppose studio space can be expensive.
They're also the Warringah Printmakers.
Of course, relevant to this conversation are the partnerships we have with Warringah Printmakers, perhaps more formal in past years, in the 2005 to 10. It's still active. They're going further afield. They don't just want to exhibit in their local area. They're connected with Sydney Printmakers, often memberships across both spaces, but you know, their printmakers can gather at Warringah Print Studio, present classes, be students, rent the space. That is really brilliant, but they don't have permanent studio space there at the site. And we've partnered with Cicada Press, Michael Kempson at COFA, and like Mossman has with the Thai Australia, we curated, we toured Personal Space Australian and Chinese art. And it is hard for artists to find space, I'm sure, continues to be.
All right, well, we might tie it up. Thank you very much, Ron, AKKY and Catherine, for coming in to talk today, and go and have a look at the Works on Paper module of the fair, because it's worth spending some time poring over the folders and over the tables. There's some really lovely things, very affordable, very collectible. Thanks.